but our focus for today is networking 101 and some best practices, right? So networking 101 means that we are going to first address some of the foundational issues around networking. What's it for? Why can it be so challenging sometimes? And then the best practices are things that you can do actively to make the most of your, your role here as a higher ed professional, to grow your network and to support your own career and professional development. I am Dr. Joseph Barber. I'm the Director of Graduate Career Initiatives here at Penn's Career Services. What we're going to cover today then are sort of to a certain extent, the feelings around networking, why sometimes it can feel challenging for some of us and not challenging for others, why it's actually helpful. So you hear a lot about it in the popular press. Network is important. You need to do networking to get your next job and to do these other things. All of that is true, but it doesn't have to be only one type of networking or only networking in one type of way. So we're going to talk about why it's helpful and then what you can actively do to sort of make the most of your networking. Let's start off with a truth for some of us. Networking is absolutely, definitely one of the scariest things that you can possibly do ever. Or at least it feels that way sometimes. And I think it feels that way in part because there's a lot of pressure to do it. You hear about it, people say you should. But for some of us, those with introverted tendencies especially, it's not the thing that you want to do. It's not the thing that you wake up saying, I wish I could network today. And so it feels kind of scary. But I'm a scientist at heart, right? I have a PhD in animal behavior, so here's a dog. So let's break this down more scientifically and then put it into context, right? Because networking perhaps isn't as scary as other things that exist out there, right? So sharks are scary. Clowns are super scary. Definitely don't want to do anything with clowns. No networking with clowns, absolutely. Skydiving, cats, they're scary. You can be rubbing their belly and then they rip off your flesh at a moment's notice, even though they seem to be enjoying it the moment before. Legos don't seem scary at the outset, but put them in a dark room, in a children's bedroom at night when you're trying to sneak out and you tread on one, that's pretty scary. And then even before the pandemic, public transport was always terrifying, right? So, and now I feel like it's definitely terrifying. So these things are also scary. And if we do a sort of a scientific analysis, where if someone were to do that, who wasn't me, we might be able to come up with these terror danger quadrants here and really put networking in a sort of in context, right? So as we can see, clowns are high terror, but medium danger. Rubbing a cat's belly, it's high danger, but low terror. There's a benefit to that. Networking sort of falls into the sort of the low terror, low danger quadrant here. So it shouldn't be something that is too hard to do if we come at it from a strategic perspective. So this is sort of what we're going to be talking about today, is how to operationalize networking in a way that's going to make it feel like it's a thing that you want to do, that it's helpful for you, and that you can see the benefit of doing it. For those of you like me who have introverted tendencies, that one of the challenges of networking is that it's often energy draining as opposed to energy creating, right? It's not something that will give you joy necessarily every time that you do it or every time that you're told to do it. And that can be hard because we're all busy doing different things, and the more things that you do that are energy draining, the harder it is to do the work around you. So one of the reasons that it can be energy draining is sort of the different way that people see the world, right? So if I put this image up here, it's a very stock image of networking. Those of you who look at this image and say to yourself, this is great, I don't know any of these people, but I could find out more about them. I could start a conversation. I could join in the conversations that they are having. Then, potentially you are someone with extroverted tendencies. Those of you who see this picture and sort of shudder internally and say, I really wouldn't want to be in this place. I see people having conversations, but what are they talking about? And how do they know each other? And who are these people? Chances are you may be someone with introverted tendencies. Those of you who see the glass of wine and say, I wish I had a glass of wine, those are just people who wish it was Friday. Everyone sees something different, but the idea is that we all approach the world from our own, perspectives. During the pandemic, I think there was a lot of online interactions, right? A lot of virtual networking opportunities. And one of the platforms that we had at Career Services for a short period of time was called Meetaway. And a whole group of people could come in and then you'd be paired one-on-one with someone to have a chat. From an introverted perspective, it was much easier to have a conversation with one person, especially if you knew who they were ahead of time, and make the most of that experience, but still energy draining from my perspective. I was in one of these meetaways, and there were obviously an odd number of people because at one point, after having like 4 or 5 conversations, I was kicked into this place. And it said, your next conversation is 7 minutes away. Grab a drink, prepare yourself for the next conversation. When I got to this place, this alone place, I was extremely joyful and happy internally, right? And I never did go back to the conversation because I had found my spot. And that's just the challenge I think that many of us feel when it comes to networking, is that given the opportunity not to do it, you're always going to find the joy in being away from that situation. I'm not going to say that extroverts have it all easy, right? And I'm going to talk about some of the challenges of being an extrovert when it comes to networking too. It's not just a challenge for introverts, but these are all realities. And sometimes it's linked to this idea of a social battery, right? For extroverts, your battery is charged when you're often around people. If you're sitting in your office by yourself doing work, you might say to yourself, hey, maybe I can grab lunch with someone and chat with them about what they're doing, right? Or catch up with someone. That is an energy, battery charging opportunity. If you are someone with introverted tendencies, sitting in your office and it's lunchtime and you're just doing your own thing, eating your lunch, you are recharging your battery then and there, because that's where you want to be. You don't necessarily want to be out and having conversations. That's what will drain your battery, right? So the social battery is just a concept, but a very real one when it comes to sort of the idea of networking. When I get on a trolley in the morning coming to work, and I, on those rare occasions, I am the only person in that trolley, right? And there's me and the driver, me. That is a joyful way that I start my day. And then everyone who gets on that trolley sort of lessens my energy around the day, right? It's not their fault, and I'm perfectly happy to have a conversation with them. It's just, if it could just be me and the driver all day long, then I'd be perfectly happy, right? So these are the realities that we face as we are networking. If we think about this in terms of skill sets then, right? So as an introvert, whilst you may not be most comfortable in a social setting, you tend to be really good at being strategic about how to use social environments, or how to use connections that you're making, or how to find information that you're looking for, sometimes by not speaking to someone, sometimes by speaking to someone. And so there's a lot of strategic thinking. Introverts tend to be really great communicators one-on-one, especially great listeners. And those are really good, strong points for networking. Extroverts are very happy in most cases in social group settings, not all social group settings, but in many of them, they do make conversations look effortless, right? And I think introverts sort of see extroverts as, I wish I could do that. But just because you're having a conversation doesn't mean that you're having a strategic conversation, doesn't mean that you're actually centering your own professional and career development as part of that conversation, right? You can have a lot of good high energy conversations that don't move you forward in terms of answering your questions or getting you information that you can then act upon as you are sort of creating a strategy for your next steps. So just because you're a good communicator doesn't always mean that you're a strategic communicator. So everyone has their own set of challenges that they bring to networking. Obviously, what we have to think about next is, what is the purpose of it, right? Why do you want to network? Why is this thing so important? Now, if I ask this question, half of you might say, I don't want to network. It's a lie. I don't want to do that at all. So I'm going to change the question slightly to, why should you network, right? Which is a slightly more easier question for everyone to ask. And these are some of the benefits that I think, as a higher ed professional especially, but as anyone, that you can gain from a networking strategy, as in terms of moving yourself forward in your own career as a professional. So there's a lot of information gathering that's critical to networking, right? You don't know everything about every job that's out there. You don't know everything about every school or office at Penn or every organization beyond Penn. And so networking is a way for you to find that information quickly and efficiently, because looking for that information online might take you a longer time than having a conversation with someone who already knows that information. Networking is key in terms of operationalizing how you use your time at Penn. If you find out that the role you want next requires this type of skill or this type of knowledge, because you have a conversation with someone and they say that, then you can say to yourself, well, how can I build those skills? How can I build that knowledge area so that I can position myself for that position moving forward, right? So you can look at your role right now and say, given that I need this skill to be effective in my next role, what projects can I prioritize in my portfolio to make sure that I'm building that skill, to make sure that there's something that I can highlight in my resume? You can also learn about the resources that are out there, right? You don't have to discover these things all by yourself. There might be professional associations. There might be online tools or platforms that you can leverage. Networking helps you find those things easier because other people are already using them. So that's the research and information gathering side, all of which are valuable to your own professional growth. There's also the branding side of it, right? Networking is all about you sharing information with people as well as it is gathering information from people, and practicing your branding, practicing saying positive things about yourself, practicing highlighting the skills and values that you bring to an organization is a lifelong skill that everyone needs to practice. We're not always taught to say good things about ourselves, and our voice inside often wants to say negative things about ourselves. So verbalizing the things that you do well, your successes, the impact that you've made, is a really good practice. Your personal or your professional brand is controlled by what you show people what you've done, but also by what you say to people about what you've done, right? They will remember that, they will associate that with you, and then it will be how they think of you because you've given them information so that they can create an image of you in their mind, right? That's what a brand is. And then networking is about helping others as much as it is about helping and supporting your own professional and career growth, right? So there's lots of ways to have impacts in the world of networking. So these are some of the goals, the benefits of networking, things that you can learn that you can then act on to move yourself forward as part of your career next steps. And at the end of the day, what networking actually is just conversations, but with a goal in mind, right? So they are strategic conversations where you come with questions in mind, questions that if you find answers to will move you forward. And then when you have those questions, you say to yourself, well, who has answers to those questions? Because those conversations are going to be the most meaningful to you. Those conversations are going to be intentional. Those are going to be valuable. Those are going to be conversations where the person can see that they are valuable to you, that their lived experiences are value to you, right? And those are going to be positive conversations, even if you're not a big fan of having conversations with strangers, right? Because they answer a question. They move you towards a goal, right? They're intentional. And then this last point is really critical, right? No one is going to wake up in the middle of the night and say, I should tell Joseph about this resource if I haven't in some way communicated to that person that that resource would be helpful to me, or that it would be relevant to something that I'm doing or interested in, right? So you have to give people the opportunity to help you by being able to verbalize what it is that you need, what help you need, what you're interested in, where you're going next, right? The more input that you give other people, the easier it is for them to mull that over in their head and suddenly out of nowhere say, hey, here's a resource that Joseph might find helpful because he said the other day that X or Y, right? And so being able to verbalize those things is so helpful to help other people be able to help you because everyone knows a lot of people. You have to stay top of mind so that they can think about you as they think about what they know and who you might benefit from connecting with. When you hear about networking, sometimes it's about, it's always connected to getting a job or finding a job, right? And I think that's an ultimate goal for networking, is to position yourself for future opportunities. Opportunities is a broad category. It could be a job, could be other things, future opportunities. But I would say that the best type of networking is not a direct line between the networking and getting a job. It's a direct line between the information gathering and getting the job. The more you can learn from your networking, the easier it is for you to position yourself, develop new narratives, so that when you are ready for the next opportunity, you know about that opportunity, you know what's valued in that opportunity, you know how to talk about yourself in a positive, relevant way specific to that opportunity, right? So you've done all the hard work through your networking so that you can position yourself for that role. Now, knowing someone at an organization or in an office who can advocate for you, that's also a byproduct of networking, right? So knowing people and then knowing what your value is, which is what you're doing, you're communicating that, is going to be an effective byproduct of your networking that's going to position yourself more effectively for future opportunities. So then here are sort of the stepping stone approach to sort of networking, to information gathering, to sort of leveraging that, right? So one of the things that people with introverted tendencies do really well is they do a lot of online research before they speak to people, because in the back of their minds, they're hoping that just by doing the online research, they don't have to speak to people, even though it's going to be beneficial. So doing the online research, exploring the paths that you might be interested in, seeing what information is out there, is going to help you ask smart questions, because what you can't find out, what you don't know from your online research, turns into questions that you then reach out to people who do know the answers to these questions and who can give you those insights. Developing questions is a key foundation to networking. We'll talk about that more in just a second as well. Once you have those questions in mind, your goal is to find the people who can answer those questions. Not everyone can answer every question, and one person is unlikely to answer all the questions that you have. So that's why you need a network of people to be able to answer different elements. Then you're going to explore how you are, what things you have in common with people, where your overlaps are, what might be a good way of starting a conversation that says, hey, I'm also someone, I'm also in a career services role, I also went to this institution, I also used to work at this place, right? Your overlaps help you start a conversation. That's going to be some of your research into how you can find connections to people who are meaningful to you because they share something in common with you. Once you have these conversations, and we'll talk about those as well, you're going to then act on that information. What can you do with that information now to make you a better candidate, to make you move you along in the progress that you're making as part of your professional and career development? What can you act on now in your current role so that you can position yourself for that future role that's out there? And then act on it, right? So these are the stepping stone approaches that are going to make networking a key part of your professional development. It's much easier to take a stepping stone approach than to try to get from where you are right now to a future position without doing any of that work, right? Without doing the online research, without knowing more about those roles. You can't leap across the lake like this in one go. You're going to hit the water and it's going to be a belly flop and it's going to be painful. So that's not the way to go, right? The stepping stone approach of gathering more and more information, building more and more contacts is going to be a really effective way of getting enough information so that you can position yourself effectively. And that's what we're going to sort of highlight in our best practices here. So these are introvert approved because I am someone with introverted tendencies. They are extrovert relevant because all networking is good networking. And I'm going to share a few resources as well at the end just to sort of keep you on track. When I talk about networking, it's not just this picture in the top left, right? Networking looks different for different people at different times and different contexts. It's not about large groups of people. Sometimes it's the worst type of networking in a group of people. Sometimes it's about communicating in different ways. So I want you to sort of keep that in mind too, as we are going through this, right? It doesn't have to be wine and cheese with people you don't know. And as you think about networking, the last sort of general information I have here is that what you're trying to do in most cases is you're trying to listen to the way that people talk about themselves, especially those people that you're reaching out to who are doing the thing that you think you want to do. Listen to the way that they are talking about themselves and think about how you can talk about yourselves in similar ways, right? If you want a position, a different position from the one you have now, and you need to sort of create a new narrative for yourself that demonstrates that you have relevant skills for that role, then talk to people in that role and listen to the way that they describe their skills and experiences, because that language and the stories that they tell can be the stories that you tell about yourself, right? About your own experiences that will then sound more relevant to the role that you are interested in. Building future advocates, we talked about this, right? So the idea of the more people who know you and know your value, the easier it is for those people to advocate on your behalf. Let's say you do apply for a position in another office and someone knows you, they can speak to the hiring manager and say, hey, this is a great person. I've met them in different situations and I know that they're really passionate about the work that we are doing, right? And that's going to boost the potential that you're a good candidate for that role. Practicing talking about yourself is so critical. I'll give you some examples of what that can look like as we go forward. So what questions do you have and what answers do you need? I think fundamentally, number one tip for or best practice is to make sure that you have specific questions before you say to yourself, today I'm going to go network, right? Because again, for introverts, without a question, being in a room full of people where you don't have a goal and you don't know what you're doing there and you don't know if you are being successful in having conversations, very energy draining. So with questions in mind, you can be much more strategic. It still means that you can have positive conversations with people, just friendly conversations, questions that aren't necessarily transactional. But in every conversation that you're having, you can say to yourself, I wonder if this person can provide insight into these questions that I have. For extroverts, the idea of having lots of conversations, but without having any goal in mind is a challenge, right? So keeping you on track with that. The real purpose of having questions when you're networking is that you're always trying to convince someone that you don't really know very well, so a contact that you're making, to stop what they're doing in their busy day and talk to you, right? And they're busy doing other things and they have their own goals and projects they're working on, and you reach out to them and say, hey, I'd love to chat with you. What's going to make them stop their busy day and want to help you? And one of the ways that they'll be excited to help you is if you can articulate why them in particular. What is it about this person and their lived experience that would be so helpful to you that would make them feel good about being themselves? One of my sort of networking rules of thumb is, your goal in a networking conversation is to make the other person feel good about being themselves, feel good about their lived experience, feel good that they have an experience that is valuable to you, right? And if they feel good about your conversation and they feel valued, they will associate that positive feeling with you. in their mind, right? So sort of animal training is in my background too, right? It's a positive interaction. That's what they feel when they think about you. If it's an awkward, negative, interaction, you ask them for a job and they're like, I don't have a job. Obviously, they'll remember that negative feeling as well, right? So making people feel good about themselves is a critical part of the networking process. So what are some of the questions then that you might have in terms of your position right now, being at Penn in a role? So one of the questions often that comes up is, well, what's next, right? I'm in this role, I got here, I worked hard to get here, but now what? What paths are open to me? What roles are going to support my growth? Where do I see myself 10 years from now, right? So these are all great questions. We are, all of us, at one point in time right now on the timeline, but that timeline can take us in different directions moving forward. And so it's great to explore that, and networking is one way that we can do that. You might have a particular interest in a certain type of career field or a certain type of work, right? So you're interested in DEI, and you might say, well, I'm in this role, but what other roles at Penn really support this? One of the sessions later on this afternoon is about finding opportunities that sort of align with DEI type opportunities or type roles. You might feel totally lost, right? You got to where you are now and you're like, I don't really know how I got here. I don't know necessarily where to go next. What do I do, right? And it's a really great question. It's a very normal question. It's not sort of unusual to feel that way. I actually did a session on this for our first generation graduate student week a few weeks ago. And there's a presentation on YouTube that's out there. I'm going to throw the links back in the chat again, in case people came in after I threw them in the first time. So you're welcome to take a look at that video as well and see how it's a perfectly natural sort of state of being to feel that way, but there are steps that you can take to move forward. We talked about this idea of, networking ultimately is going to end in you having conversations with people. What we call these at Career Services are informational interviews, where you're finding people in a role that you're excited by and you're saying to them, hey, I'd love to learn more about how you got here. I'd love to learn more about what you do here. I'd love to learn more about the nature of the organization or the nature of the challenges that you face. Informational interviews are a really well-structured type of networking. They're usually one-on-one. They're usually set up, in advance. You know who you're going to be talking with. They're with a person that you want to talk with, and you have a specific set of questions, right? And so these are really helpful processes. And our guide here is just a great, easy read for how to sort of operationalize informational interviewing. There are so many questions that you can ask as part of an informational interview. These are just 5 that I think are often good questions because they give you, in many cases, actionable output that you can use, right? So when you ask someone, how did you know this was a good fit for you? You can then reflect on what they say and say, well, how would I think about that? How would I know it's a good fit for me? Does what they say about it being a good fit, does that resonate with me in terms of how they experience the positive aspects of their role? What are some of the skills that are most valuable in this role? What skills do you use to be successful? And then if they give you skills that you don't yet have, it's an opportunity for you to build those skills. If they give you skills that you do have, but as you look at your LinkedIn profile or your resume, you haven't mentioned those skills, it gives you an opportunity to bring those to the forefront if you were to apply for a position, because now you know those skills are valuable. What are some of the knowledge areas that you need in this field, right? Knowledge is something that you can gain in many different situations. Knowing that it's valuable gives you then an opportunity to, take a class, get another degree, find a professional association and explore that. What are the challenges that you face? It's a great question because in any role that you apply to moving forward, people want to know that you can solve real life emerging challenges in that role. So if you already know what those challenges are, you can be ready in an interview to talk about how you address those challenges. You can highlight that in a cover letter, right? So a really great way of sort of highlighting that. Now, you don't want all your questions to be negative leaning, right? So what's been one of your most engaging projects is a much more positive question, but you can sort of explore why it was engaging and how likely you'd be doing that type of project and whether you would find that engaging at the same time. So lots of opportunities there to explore that. At the end of all these questions then is a fundamental question of who can help me answer these questions. So that moves us now into our number 2 sort of best practice, right? Growing your network at Penn. What does that look like? How do you find people? How do you know these are the right people? And how do you keep that sort of conversation going moving forward? Now, I talked about this quickly in the last session that we had. So some of you may have seen this before, but if you're on LinkedIn and you go to the University of Pennsylvania school page and you click on those 20,000 employer, it's a sort of an active link on that page. It's going to take you to this page where you can explore all 20,000 of these people by keyword and by other filters. So a shout out to Candice, who works in the BGS office in career development. Shout out to Kia, A shout out to Kellyanne, who I don't know, but we're using names that start with K. So I'll shout out to Kelly and Clary as well. Let's say you're interested in financial roles, right? One of the challenges of being at Penn is that we're often in school systems or division systems, and it's hard to know who are the other people that do what you do in your role in the other schools at Penn or other offices at Penn, right? So by doing this sort of search, I can find 614 people who are sort of doing financial administration or financial coordination in some respect. Perhaps not all at Penn right now, but people who have that background. 600 is still too many people, so let's narrow that down by looking for people who share something in common with me, either people that I'm directly connected with or people that I can know because I know someone that they know, right? The secondary connection. I know someone who knows that person I'm interested in. So we can narrow it down from that to get to a more reasonable 222 people. Sticking with the K names, Kimberly here is a second degree connection. If I click on Kimberly's profile, I see that I am connected to Mark, who used to work in our office here at Career Services. Mark is connected to Kimberly. And if I really wanted to reach out to Kimberly, then I could use that connection in common, right? Hi, Mark. I'm trying to reach out to Kimberly. I see she works in this office. I'd love to learn more about her role. Could you help me start a conversation? Or I could ask Mark if I could just use his name. Hey, Kimberly, we both know Mark. He said you'd be a great person to reach out to with a couple of questions about financial administration, right? So that's how your network helps you grow your network. The people that you know other people. And as soon as you can find those people in common or find the people that you want to reach out to and realize that you have someone in common, you can grow that network quite dramatically, right? And easily within the Penn system. But it just doesn't have to sort of only be Penn people or rather, Penn staff. You can sort of think about this as if you were a student coming into a role because you are part of an alumni network too, right? So one of the questions you can ask yourself is, who are the alumni from your undergraduate institution or your graduate institution who also work at Penn? Because you share something in common with those. We share two things in common. One, you work at Penn, and two, that you have an undergraduate institution in common, right? And so that's going to be easier to start a conversation because you have of that commonality. So I didn't go to Dickinson College, but if you did go to Dickinson College, you can come here to this page and click on alumni. You don't have to be an alum to click on alumni. I'm not an alum, and so I can do all this. But if you were there, you could say to yourself, how many alumni are there at Dickinson and how many of these people are at Penn? So I'm going to click on alumni. You see that there are 23,000 of them on LinkedIn. And then under the where they work, I can throw in University of Pennsylvania, and I can find that we have 34 alumni from Dickinson who work at the University of Pennsylvania, right? And if you're here at Penn, they're here at Penn, you share other things in common, that's a sort of a network that you can tap into. Now, I'm doing quite a few shout outs here. So a shout out to Barbara Hewitt, who's the executive director at Career Services. She's my supervisor. So great to see her in this list. Let's see who else we have. Joe Ellen here, associate director of the Graduate Student Center. Okay, moving on. Steps that you can take then to strengthen your network. So what I've done thus far is identified how you might find people through these systems. Now we're going to talk about sort of, you have a network. Everyone has a network already. How do you maintain that network? How do you make sure that that network is productive and meaningful and supportive and people remember you and know what you're good at and they have a positive association with your professional brand? So let's take a look at what this could look like. So these are some of the strategies that I think are effective at keeping the conversation going. These are things that you can do through your network, especially on a platform like LinkedIn, to grow, support, and continue engagement with your network. You share updates, you can engage with your peers and congratulate them for their successes. Uplifting other people is a really great networking strategy because they benefit and you benefit at the same time. You can associate yourself with new roles and new positions by sharing information about those roles and positions so that people associate you with that knowledge, with that field, right? So you post about finance roles or you share posts about finance, people will see that you're doing that and associate you with finance, even if you don't actually have a background in finance, because you're active in that field doing that. And then you can find ways to support others that are out there. Now, usually what I would do to demonstrate, how to do this is I would go on LinkedIn and I'd find different examples of how different people do this. For today, though, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a masterclass by one of the new staff members in our office here at Career Services, Dustin. Dustin does not know I'm doing this, but Dustin hopefully will appreciate the fact that I think he does a wonderful job of doing all these things that I say that you should be doing to strengthen your network in a very consistent and meaningful approach. And so if you're looking to your own, how can I take advantage of LinkedIn, or how can I take advantage of my network, follow what Dustin does in the next few slides, because it's a really great example of doing this in a strategic, thoughtful, and supportive way. So let's take a look at what Dustin does. First of all, let's look at his profile. Good photo, Penn relevant background. I see the speaker icon after his name, which means that he's recorded the pronunciation of his name, which makes it easier for people to engage with him, because then no one worries about getting the name wrong. You can do that. You have to go on the LinkedIn app and then and you can then in the settings of the LinkedIn app, record your name, and then it gets put on your profile here. I encourage everyone to do that as a best practice. Dustin started fairly recently, and so one of the things he did is share an update, right? I am moving to a new role at Penn, right? And that's important. He has 230 people who celebrated that, and 80 people who commented on that. He's giving his network the opportunity to celebrate his, his movement with him. He's bringing his network with him as he starts this new role. So a really great thing to do. And I think a lot of people do that when they start the new role. Dustin is great at congratulating the peers that are around him, right? So Dustin was helping out with graduation, and one of the other staff in our office, Laura, was the marshal captain for our office, and Dustin is giving her a shout out. So it's nice to see that, celebrating the successes of others and the hard work of others as part of associating himself with the success of students at Penn, which is a great celebration of all the work that we do. Celebrating his own successes, right? And this is critical because no one is going to advocate for you more than you yourself, right? You are the best advocate for what you're doing. And so whenever you're doing something, whenever you've made a progress, whenever you've achieved a goal, it's worth highlighting it. And it's not bragging to say that I did this thing, because no one else will say it for you, right? No one else is going to spend time making sure that your celebrations or your successes are celebrated. It gives an opportunity for people to celebrate with you. And it's really critical to help people see your passion, your energy, your motivation, right? So this was a CPR training that Dustin did. It's a great group photo. Dustin's there at the back. Wonderful way to sort of celebrate the successes of that. It's, as I said, you have to sort of verbalize this. If you're doing lots of hard work and you're making great successes, but no one ever talks about it, and you don't talk about it, then the world doesn't see it, right? And those things don't get associated with you. You have to find a way to associate your progress and your successes in very visible ways. Other ways that Dustin celebrates successes, right? So he was on a panel, and there he is sharing his face, right? Getting a graphic out there with your face on it is a really great way of helping people remember that situation, because people remember things sometimes visually more than the words that they're reading. So a great sort of a branding best practice is to have content and imagery associated. Share posts that contain knowledge that you want to be associated with. So Dustin started in our office and is working with engineering students, and engineering wasn't necessarily a background that he brought with him in particular. And so it's something that he's being trained on, something that he's learning on his own. What he's doing here, though, is a great representation of being associated with new knowledge that you want to be associated with you. So this was a post that Anand put out there on different programming languages and how they're used over time. All Dustin did was comment on it. This is fascinating. What I see as the reader, or as the viewer here, is I see programming languages and the fact that Dustin is fascinated by it. And so in my head, what I'm doing is I'm associating those two concepts together. Dustin being fascinated about programming languages. And so if I were to articulate what I knew about Dustin, I would say he's very excited to learn about things like programming languages. He has an interest in programming languages. He works with engineering students. He has this interest, right? And so over time, if you do this with different types of information, that's what people think about you. You're connecting yourself with different information out there. People begin to see you associated with that information. So it's a really easy way of changing your narrative to a different knowledge area or a different type of information that's out there. In this case, Dustin just reposted this thing about being a good manager. And again, the same thing happens, right? So I see Dustin's face and his name, and then I see Chris's post about being a good manager. In my head, though, Dustin and being a good manager are now connected themes. And so whether or not it was strategic that way, it's a great way of demonstrating, again, connecting yourself with different information that you want to be associated with your narrative and with your brand. Here's Dustin, again, commenting on and sharing information about networking. We talk about networking, so I thought I'd throw this post in there just to demonstrate that Dustin also has expertise in this area as well. And then finally, supporting your network, supporting those people out there in your network in the way that you would hope to be supported by them. So this is Dustin doing a shout out to a student who he had a pleasure working with, who needs support in finding a job because their job was rescinded in this current uncertain climate. So supporting the network that he is part of is a really great networking best practice. All of these things are really good examples of what you can be doing yourself. They don't take a lot of time, they don't take a lot of energy, they don't require a lot of work, just consistent advocating for yourself and advocating for others is a great way to do networking. The one way to think about this is passive networking, right? Active networking might be having a conversation with someone. Passive networking is what you can do to be associated with people, concepts, and information. So again, this is just another post, a blog post. It was focused on graduate students and postdocs or PhD students, but applicable to everyone, about how you can use this type of passive networking to support your personal and career growth. Now, this concept, the 80-10-10 rule, has always been something that I found to be a good way of visualizing what you're trying to do. This was something that an author about career development in a book, he had done interviews with, I think they were PhDs in different fields, and he spoke to this woman executive in the industry, and she talked through her 80-10-10 rule. And I think it's a really smart, concise way of thinking about this. She said, 80% of my work week I spend doing the best work possible. I try to go after issues and problems that really make a difference, that really make a change, right? So this is 80% of the work time, not family time, not sleep time, not exercise time, not joy time, 80% of the work time. 10% of the work week then I devote to professional development. I attend talks, gain information, I read. I also try to meet new people, which sounds somewhat like someone who's introverted because it's like I try to meet new people. But anyway, professional development, gaining new knowledge, gaining new connections. And then this is the key part. The final 10% of my work I spend telling as many people as possible what a good job I'm doing when I'm doing the 80% of work that I'm doing, right? So this is you demonstrating that you have a real impact and value by highlighting your successes. It's the hardest thing that oftentimes that we can do because we're not trained to say good things about ourselves, but it's a real lifelong lesson of advocating for yourself. And so this 80-10-10 breakdown of your work week, I think is a really nice way of trying to sort of put into context what you're trying to do when you're networking, right? 10% of your daily week should be about sort of networking and engaging with new information and new people. And then 10% should be highlighting your successes so that other people can see that and advocate for you in different ways. Number 4, in-person interactions are inevitable and they're helpful. And for me, they're great when they're over. But they are part of what networking is, right? You can do a lot of the passive networking, but you really want to get out there and engage with people. And so what are some best practices around this? For me, I have, I think, a hard time with some of the foundational stuff with meeting people. Names and faces don't always stick in my head. And oftentimes they're very context specific. I meet someone in a certain context, but then I meet them in a totally different context. And I have a hard time remembering who that person is or putting a name to a face because now they're in a different context. So my go-to line in many social situations is to say, hey, I don't think we've met yet. And I'm Joseph. And I introduce myself and they're like, oh, we did meet. Back in, yesterday or 2 hours ago, whatever it was. But it's a sort of a disarming way of just starting a conversation, right? And so for those of you who may have more hesitancy about getting into these situations, having a go-to line is a really good thing to do. A really great best practice that many people talk about is this idea of don't go to an event to be part of the event, help organize the event, because then you have some purpose, something to do other than just talking with people. And by being in an organizing role, people will talk to you. Right? They won't, because of the nature of your engagement. So that's just a really great example of how to sort of be strategic about it when you're thinking about networking events. And at Penn, there are lots of different ways to get involved, from the SALT conference to other types of things that are out there. So look for those opportunities. Think about group settings not as where the networking happens, but where you find people to network with later. So whatever the context is, a lunch, a meal, a gathering, you might find someone and say, hey, could I follow up with you later? I'd love to chat more about this. Because that moment in time, the group people, everything going on may just not be the best time for you to have a conversation or to get some of your questions answered. But it's a great way of meeting people to think about for next steps. And then this is something that I always talk to my students about in the classes that I teach is always ask a question, because it has so many benefits when you're sort of in an in-person situation, or even when you're in an online situation. And let's talk about what those benefits are, right? So for you, the benefits are that first of all, you have to pay attention in order to ask a good question, and then you get an answer to the question that you have. And that's always going to be helpful. It's going to grow your knowledge. You're going to make a lasting impression on the speaker because the speaker then knows that you are interested and it gives you an opportunity to follow up. You're also going to have the opportunity to introduce yourself to other people in the space by asking that question. And I'll show you how to do that in a second. It's really helpful for speakers to know that people are interested when people ask questions. It adds to the energy in the room, makes them feel good about the topic, makes them want to talk more excitedly about their experiences, which means that you will learn more from them because they're going to open up a little bit more about whatever it is that they're talking about. And then everyone else is going to be happy because they probably had the same question, but they just didn't answer it because they didn't want to. So then how do you ask a question in a group setting? So this is my sort of my go-to recommendations is, you might be in a conference setting or a meeting setting, not necessarily just a staff meeting, but a bigger meeting. Stand up and before you ask a question, introduce yourself, because you're not only introducing yourself to the speaker, you're introducing yourself to the 20 people sitting around you. Hi, I'm Joseph. I'm the Director of Graduate Career Initiatives here at Penn's Career Services. My question is X. If you don't introduce yourself, what tends to happen is people are like, oh, that's a really great question. I wonder who that mysterious person was who asked it. I wonder who that person is, right? And they have no context then to know who you are, no way to introduce themselves to you because, they already had the face and maybe they didn't see you because you were sitting down. So this is a really great way of introducing yourself seamlessly to a whole group of people. It's also then a great way for you to network with the speaker because now you have a good follow-up approach to that speaker. Hi, I was the one who asked about this question. Your answer was really great. I found it, it really answered my question in this way. Thank you so much for doing that. The reason I asked is because of this. Hey, and I wonder if I can ask you just another quick follow-up question. And hey, could we connect after this session, right? So it gives you permission to have more of a conversation because you've already started the relationship, that professional relationship with that speaker by asking that question. So this is a hypothetical, obviously, it doesn't always work out in this way, but this is very intentional about making sure that you are networking broadly and widely as you are in in-person settings. My final best practice, get the networking out of your head. It can feel very overwhelming when you're networking or meeting new people and you've had conversations and you're not quite sure what to do with all that information. So a couple of strategies. One is, if you're a database kind of person, is create yourself an Excel spreadsheet. Jobs at Penn, jobs beyond Penn, doesn't really matter. Your columns are sort of specific to where you are in this process, but think about what information you have, think about the connections that you've made, think about the information that they gave you, and then get it down on paper or on your Excel sheet so that it lives outside of your head so you can see it, so you can see where the blanks are, right? In this table, I have blank cells. I now know what my action is. I need to fill those cells, so I need to do some research or I need to have some conversations. Right, it really makes networking manageable and strategic because you begin to fill it out and see what information you're gathering. The non-database version of that is to have a networking buddy, right? And with that buddy, to verbalize what your experiences have been when networking, to tell people what you learned, to tell people how that was important, to tell people that the conversation wasn't helpful at all, but to get it out of your head and to verbalize it so that you can hear what you are walking away with as part of that conversation. So an accountability buddy who can help you, someone maybe outside of your division or office, finding ways to connect with, again, alumni from your institution or people in different roles at Penn outside of your division. These are all strategies that you can take advantage of. And then finally, so a few resources for you to sort of think about. One is Lunch Club. We sort of share this with students because it's a really interesting sort of premise. Lunch Club is an online platform that matches you with people, not Penn people, just people around the world who share some interest with you, share some commonality. You don't get to pick the people, but you do get to pick the time and the date, right? So when you sign up for this, you'll fill in some information about yourself, and then it will say, which of these time slots are you available to meet? And you'll say, well, Thursday at 3 o'clock. And then as you get closer to Thursday at 3 o'clock, you'll be matched with someone who shares something in common with you. And you won't really know who that person is until you get the information, but then you can find out what their background is. You can try to guess why you might be matched. And then you have a non-transactional conversation with that person where you are practicing asking good questions. You're practicing highlighting your narrative, who you are, what you do well, and you might walk away with surprising knowledge, new contacts that the person might actually have that sort of align with you, or just great experience networking in a very structured environment. A lot of the stress around networking is trying to find the right time, the right place, and the right location to meet people. That all the logistics is taken out of your hands with this platform so that you can just focus on the conversations. So a really nice thing to play around with. You may have heard about our YouTube channel. We have a whole networking playlist there that you can take a look at. Different aspects of networking, from LinkedIn to how to keep conversations going. We talked about LinkedIn Learning and how there's lots of information on LinkedIn Learning about networking, free videos that you can access as Penn staff. So do take advantage of that. Beyond Graduate School, the platform that we have for graduate students, for master students at Penn, has a Building Your Network for Career Success section as part of one of their modules. That's just a great video that sort of puts it into context about how you can do this in your workplace. So not as a student, but in your workplace. And then do what Dustin does is my last resource. Feel free to reach out to Dustin. I'm sure he'd appreciate hearing from people. But the examples that I shared from Dustin's LinkedIn sort of strategy are really great best practices that you can leverage.